Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our webinar today. We will get started here in just a few moments. I'm going to let everybody trickle into our virtual meeting space today, and then we'll get started with our conversation. So welcome, everybody. It looks like we have a good number of individuals that have joined us for our conversation today. So thank you for joining, and I hope more of you will join us here shortly. Today's webinar is really kind of going through different immigration scams and how to avoid them. Our partners at the Immigrant Legal Resource Center, or ILRC, will guide us through the conversation today. We're joined by Ariel Brown and Liz Toffa, who are going to lead us in the conversation. But before we get started, I want to go over just some general housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded. You will receive a copy of today's recording and the PowerPoint presentation and any of the resources that are shared today by our two fantastic panelists at the email that you used to register for the conversation today. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, we encourage you to use the Q&A chat feature to ask any questions of our presenters, and we'll be able to answer them throughout the presentation, and we've dedicated some time at the end to answer some of those questions as well. We also have closed captioning available, so if you hover either at the bottom or at the top of your screen, depending on how you have it set up, and you click the CC or the closed caption, you'll be able to enable the live captions for today's webinar. With that, I'm really excited for today's conversation, and I'll turn it over to our two fabulous panelists.
Okay, thanks, Alonso. If you could just advance to the next slide. Before we launch into our topic for today, we just wanted to introduce the ILRC, where Liz and I work, if you haven't heard of us before. So we're a national nonprofit headquartered in San Francisco. Our mission is to work with and educate immigrants, community organizations, and the legal sector to continue to build a democratic society that values diversity and the rights of all people. And we work in three primary areas. We work with the immigrant community, doing education, outreach, and assisting in community organizing. We also work in immigration law and policy, where we try to push forward laws and policies that would expand the rights of immigrants. And then we try to raise awareness about and prevent laws and policies that would have a negative impact on the immigrant community. And then we also provide many trainings like this one that we're doing today. We also write manuals, practice advisories, some that are for immigration legal practitioners, advocates, and also for the community. So if we want to go on to the next slide. So today, we wanted to debunk some common immigration scams that you might have heard about. You might see these on Facebook or TikTok, or maybe you've just heard about them. Because, as we're going to talk about a little bit more later, getting bad immigration advice may not only cost you tons of money, but it can also put you or someone in your family at risk of deportation. So it's really important to get good advice from trustworthy individuals. So if we go on to the next slide. So the first scam that we wanted to talk about is if you've lived in the US for at least 10 years, then you can get a green card. Sounds pretty straightforward. You probably know lots of people who would think, oh, I probably qualify for that. But if we go on to the next slide, the reality is that it's a lot more complicated than that. It's a lot harder to win a green card in this situation. Because what we're really talking about is called cancellation of removal, which you can only be granted by an immigration judge, meaning that you have to be in deportation proceedings, facing deportation, to be able to ask for this. And then not only do you have to have lived in the US for at least 10 years prior to being put into removal proceedings, but you also have to have a spouse or child who's either a US citizen or a lawful permanent resident, so a green card holder. And you have to show that this family member would suffer exceptional and extremely unusual hardship if you're not granted cancellation of removal, which is a very, very high standard to meet. You may have heard about having to show hardship in other areas of immigration law, like to get a waiver. And this is actually a higher standard than that extreme hardship standard. And then you also can't have any criminal removability issues. So if you have some serious criminal issues, it might also disqualify you from applying for this, even if you're in proceedings, even if you have the family members and the amount of time in the US. So basically, it's not something, you know, that you can just walk into an immigration attorney's office and ask to apply for. It's only a defense to removal if you're facing deportation. Okay, now Liz is going to talk about the next scam.
Thanks, Ariel. Yeah, so another really common scam is that you can get a work permit or an employment authorization document, as it's referred to, if you file for asylum, regardless of whether or not your application is true. So you just file the asylum application, regardless, you know, it doesn't matter what it says, and you'll get your work permit on the basis of having that pending asylum application. And so that's actually, you know, that's the mechanisms of that is true, but there's a lot more to it. Next slide, please. So work permits are available for folks that have a pending asylum application. Asylum backlogs are very long right now. It takes a long time to get an appointment at an asylum office. And then if your application is denied at the asylum office, you will then be transferred over to the immigration court to present your case to the immigration judge. This whole process can take several years. And so a work permit is available for those that have an asylum application pending. But there's a huge risk to filing an asylum application that has false information in it. These are sometimes referred to as fraudulent asylum applications. You'll hear that in, you know, a lot of talking points for folks that are hostile to immigration, immigrant communities and immigrant populations. But filing that asylum application is going to put you at risk for removal. And if you are found to have filed a fraudulent asylum application, it's going to bar you from a number of different claims of relief. So even if you have a different claim for relief, if you're found to have lied on an asylum application, this is going to cause a huge amount of problems, and you're likely not going to be granted any kind of benefit. So the risk is very high by doing this. But an important note that this is really only for asylum applications that are false. You know, they're not connected to your specific situation. They are not, you know, they're not accurate as to what's happened to you. That's not the same as having an asylum application that's denied. You know, as long as the application is true, even if it's denied, that's not a fraudulent application. So it's just important to draw that distinction. I'll pass it back over to, oh, sorry. Next slide, please. We're skipping ahead. Another one you may have heard of, especially since the Biden administration took over in 2021, that Congress has passed or is going to pass a new legalization program, and you're going to be able to get a green card, but you have to pay to reserve your spot or pay for your ability to apply for a green card under this new legalization program. Next slide, please. So the reality of this situation is that Congress has not passed any new immigration laws, and they certainly haven't passed any new legalization programs that would allow folks who are currently not eligible to get a green card to actually get a green card. There's always a lot of talk about immigration bills that are on the table. If you're reading the news or paying attention, there's a lot of information out there about things that are being discussed between the administration and Congress and whatnot. But it's really important that there is nothing actually passed yet. And even if something does pass, there is no mechanism to reserve your spot for a benefit. There's not any mechanism to reserve your spot for any kind of immigration benefit. You are entitled to apply for whatever whatever benefit you might be eligible for. And a legal representative cannot reserve your right to apply for any application benefit, can't save you a spot in line. So you would just file an application. If this ever did come to pass, you would file an application and just you would be in line based on when you filed that application. There's no way to reserve a spot, or your chances are not higher if you reserve a spot now. Now we'll turn it back over to Ariel.
Okay, so the last scam that I was going to talk about is where you're told that there's a way to get a green card without leaving the country, even if you entered without inspection, and maybe even if you have a prior removal order by what's called self-petitioning. And whoever is telling you about this either says nothing about VAWA, the Violence Against Women Act, or the legal requirements for VAWA, or maybe they say that normal marital problems can be the basis for getting a green card through VAWA. And so on the next slide, we're going to sort of break down what this form of relief really is. So VAWA is a form of relief that was created by the Violence Against Women Act for survivors of battery or extreme cruelty, so severe domestic violence and abuse. And the abuser had to have been a US citizen or LPR spouse, or an adult US citizen child. And so the applicant has to be able to show what's called good moral character. And then if it's an abusive spouse, they have to be able to show that they married in good faith, they resided with the spouse, and they're going to have to show the serious domestic violence that they suffered. So normal marital disagreements are not the same thing as serious domestic violence and abuse, but unscrupulous immigration representatives might try to use it sort of as a workaround for the ordinary requirements to apply for a green card through adjustment of status, since people who entered without inspection in general do have to leave the country to apply for a green card. And so if someone is telling you that you don't have to, it might be that they are trying to use this, even though you don't necessarily meet all the requirements. And so they have to sort of tell you about all this stuff about what is actually required to apply for VAWA. Okay, so now Liz is going to start us off talking about what your rights are when you're looking for legal representation, so you don't wind up working with someone who's going to try and sell you on one of these scams.
So finding reputable legal representation can be really difficult. There's a lot of folks out there, and it's really can be really difficult to tell who's good and who's bad, and who's on the up and up and who's just out to get money. But the good thing is that there are some sort of, we're going to try and give you some sort of tips and tricks to ensure that you're covering yourself and that you're feeling secure in the legal representation you have secured. Next slide, please. So the first thing that you should always know is that you have rights, especially in California. Immigrants have rights as consumers under California law. But immigration law is really complex. It's really difficult. There's a lot of different layers. And there have been surveys done that show that a lot of folks that have an immigration case don't feel like they know enough about the law or policy or what's going on to make a decision on their own about how it's going to affect them or their families. So people look for help, which is a good thing. You should look for help. There's a lot of really great practitioners out there who want to help and can help and are really competent in what they're doing. But getting bad advice can, and Ariel said this earlier, can result in lost time and lost money, but it can also put you at risk of being removed. If you're sending in an application, there's not ever really a guarantee that you couldn't wind up in removal proceedings. So that's a big risk. And so getting the right advice and finding a practitioner that you trust and that has your best interest at heart is really an important step. Next slide, please.
So there are like a variety of different people, some legitimate and some not, who can offer help with immigration legal services. And so we wanted to talk about some of these different types of people who could help you with your immigration case, starting with an attorney or a lawyer. So you might think that an attorney is a safe bet, but first off, you want to confirm that they are a licensed attorney in good standing. And so to practice immigration law, an attorney must be barred, which basically means licensed. They have to pay a fee, and then the state that regulates them says that they, are up to date on the law. There's certain requirements to stay up to date. They have graduated from a law school, they have a law degree, all those things. And so they have to be licensed in at least one state in the US, but it doesn't necessarily have to be California, even if you're working with them in California, because immigration law is federal, so it doesn't vary state by state. So as long as they're licensed somewhere in the United States, that's okay. And so you can ask them where they are barred, and then you can look them up. In California, there's a really easy attorney search on the California State Bar website. We have the link there, and you can plug in their name and see their information to confirm that they are in fact licensed to practice law in California, that their license is current, and to make sure that they haven't faced any disciplinary action or had their license taken away. Some bad attorneys might continue to hold themselves out as a licensed attorney even when they've had their license taken away. And so it's really important to do, your own due diligence and confirm that they are still licensed to practice law. And then we also have here just that, it might be a good idea to consider getting a second opinion before you decide who to work with. That way you can make sure that the analysis and the options that they present are the same, and compare fees. So if we go to the next slide. So accredited representatives are not attorneys, but they are also fully qualified and regulated to provide immigration legal services. So they have special training and they work with immigration lawyers at nonprofit immigration service provider organizations. They can't just go out on their own. They have to be affiliated with a nonprofit immigration organization. And as with attorneys, you can look them up and make sure that they're legitimate. And we have the link on that slide. Okay, next slide. So then you might also have heard about immigration consultants or notarios. So these are not attorneys or accredited representatives. And they can help you with some immigration, mostly form filing. So what they are allowed to do is translate and fill out immigration forms, but they're not supposed to give you legal advice about what forms to fill out or what forms of relief you might be eligible for. And then they also cannot represent you in immigration court or in an immigration interview. So they can't go with you the way that an accredited representative or an attorney can if you have, a green card interview with USCIS, or if you're in immigration court, they're not allowed to represent you there. And, you'll often see that consultants or notarios, prepare taxes, and then maybe they do immigration forms on the side. And so something else important to know is that consultants are required to have a $100,000 bond in order to work as a consultant, and they're supposed to provide you with evidence of that bond. So the same way that, we said if you're working with an attorney and you want to make sure that they are licensed, if you're working with a consultant, you want to make sure that they have this bond. So you should ask to see it and then keep the bond number for your records. And then you can also verify that they have a bond by looking online or calling the California Secretary of State's office. And we have the links and the phone number on the slide. And then, so we want to emphasize that many immigration consultants are competent and honest, and they, provide a critically important service to immigrants who maybe can't afford an attorney, or they just don't have one in their community. Maybe they live in a rural area and there aren't that many immigration attorneys, but there are some consultants. And so, with our description of consultants, same as with, accredited reps and attorneys, it's just really important that, as Liz mentioned, your rights as a consumer, and you know how to confirm, that they are in compliance with the laws that are out there to protect you as the consumer, and to make sure that they are following all those. Okay, so now Liz is going to talk about just some sort of legal representative red flags and green flags.
The next slide. Thank you. So, this is maybe a little bit overwhelming. And the question that comes up is, well, how do I tell that my representative that I want to hire is a good representative, is going to actually represent me faithfully and not just take my money and run away? And that's a good question. And whether you're working with an attorney or a consultant or a accredited rep, these red flags are going to be similar. Also keeping in mind that, you know, consultants should not be giving you legal advice at all, but accredited reps and attorneys are able to do so. So it can be hard to figure out who's on the up and up and who isn't. So some things you want to watch out for when you're interviewing, when you're meeting with a representative for the first time. One of the big ones is somebody that guarantees you that you're going to get a benefit or a result, that they're definitely going to win your case, that you're definitely going to get your green card, that you're definitely going to get your work permit. Immigration law, as we've said a couple of times now, is extremely complex, and there really is no way to guarantee a case is going to go the way you want it to go. So anybody that doesn't set forth that there are risks to applying, that that you're going to try, they might say you have a strong case, but if they say that you're definitely going to get a green card and there's absolutely no way that you won't, that's a red flag to maybe start asking some more questions. Another one is charging you for things that you should not be charged for. So one of the ones that we hear a lot is that people are being charged for blank immigration forms. These are available online for free. You should never be charged for a blank asylum application or naturalization application. You can get those. You can get those off the internet, off the website that we have provided there, no matter what. So if someone's charging you to print those forms out or to just have those forms, that's usually a red flag. And as we talked about before, if someone says, oh, I'm going to get you on the waiting list for this benefit, there is no such thing as the waiting list. So if they're going to take your money for something that doesn't exist like that, that's obviously a problem. Another one is, filling out applications for you without talking to you, without doing a thorough consultation on what your situation is, what your case is, what your history is. Or if they're telling you to lie on an application, especially because, they say, oh, this is a sure thing because my other client who has this story got their benefit, even though it's not related to your case, we just want to get you the benefit. Or if they're handing over some sort of form that's been filled out or just telling you to sign it without reviewing it or not going over it with you, that's usually a pretty big red flag. And then another one is around payment structure. If you are being required to pay without discussing strategy, if they just want you to hand over money and they just say, okay, I'm going to get you a work permit, give me this amount of money, and they don't tell you how you're going to get that work permit, how that is all going to go. Or if they refuse to give you a contract, which needs to be in English and the language you speak best, that's going to be a pretty big red flag. If they're just taking your money and not telling you what they're going to do with it or providing any transparency on what your money's going to, that's a pretty big flag. And then another one that we unfortunately hear a lot of is if they're charging you to get your original documents back, they say they're going to hold on to your passport for safekeeping, and then they want you to give $100 to get your passport back. Or, your case is successful, you get your work permit, or you get your green card, and they are charging you to come get your green card in addition to the fees that you've already paid. So just to go to the office and pick your document up, that's a pretty big no. So if any of these things are happening at your consultation or at a meeting, remember that you have rights as a consumer and that you can ask questions and you can say this doesn't sound right, and you can always push back. Next slide, please. So what are some green flags? Because they're, it's not all doom and gloom. So how do you know that you've met it with an attorney, you've met with an accredited rep, and you've got a good one? So a good representative is going to do a thorough consultation with you, and they're going to discuss your actual situation. They're going to ask you about your criminal history. They're going to ask you about your immigration history. They're going to ask you about your family. They're going to ask you what you want out of the situation. And they're going to, if you're having, you're interested in applying under VAWA, they're going to ask you about your marriage, that sort of thing. But they're going to ask a lot of questions. Some of them may sound invasive, but they're doing a thorough consultation. They're trying to see your case from all angles. That's a pretty big green flag. They're explaining the money. For both, there are free legal service providers, there are low-cost legal service providers, and there are private attorneys and legal service providers that have fee structures, and some of them charge a lot of money in the private sphere. But just because they're charging a lot of money doesn't mean that they're not that they're unscrupulous. What would make it unscrupulous is if they just have all of these charges and they don't tell you what they're for. So they would need to explain their fee structure really clearly. And including scenarios where more money would be required. So if you lose your case and you want to do an appeal, they need to explain that that will be more money. And they need to explain how they're going to charge you. Are they going to charge you hourly? Are they going to charge you a flat fee? And if they're saying a large sum of money, are they discussing whether or not they have do payment plans? So any transparency around any money that you're going to pay them. And again, they're going to have a contract with you that is in English, and if you don't speak English in the language that you speak best, clearly outlining what money you're paying and what it's for. And then the third one is clearly explaining the risks of applying for a benefit. So they're going to do that thorough consultation, and then they're going to make an assessment and say they think you have a case for this, that, or the other thing. But they also could give you an assessment that says you don't have a strong case, and the risk in applying is high, because you may not win and you may end up in removal proceedings. They need to be explaining all of those pieces to you. So this may not be good news. You may meet with this person, they may ask you all these questions, and then they may give you some not great news. They don't see your chances of getting the benefit to be really high. As Ariel said before, you can always get a second opinion. But just because they're giving you bad news doesn't necessarily mean that another attorney is not going to see it that way, or that another attorney is unscrupulous because they see the case from a different angle. So just remember to keep in mind that these things are available. Like these red and green flags are something that are available to you, and you can always ask questions, and you can always look for another person to give you an assessment. Okay, next slide, please. So where can you find a legal representative? There are a number of places that you can look, but one of the main ways that we suggest folks look at Immigration Advocates Network has a legal directory. And so that's broken down by state or zip code, so you can find folks that are on that website and start there with your search. You can also look for a lawyer on the American Immigration Lawyers Association website. This is just for lawyers, not for accredited reps or consultants, but they will also allow you to search by location. And those folks are voluntary members of this Lawyers Association, but it's the biggest group of immigration lawyers in the country. Then Alonzo, I don't know, we could turn it over to you.
Yeah, I'll cover the legal services that the community colleges, the Cal States and the UCs offer as well. Thank you for sharing all that wonderful information. And those that are on this call that don't know where to start or are just hearing about this for the first time, the California community colleges, along with the Cal States and the UC system, also offer free immigration legal services through reputable organizations that have partnered with us across the state to provide free immigration legal services and supports. We're able to, do those full case consultations. We're able to renew your DACA, talk to you about, legal permanent residencies, VAWAs, U visas, TPS, and it's all free of charge. And depending on availability, we're also able to support with some financial assistance to pay for citizenship applications if the candidate is eligible for. Also, renewal applications for your DACA are covered through the legal services that we offer at the community colleges. And most recently, we're also able to support those that are seeking advanced parole to pay for those filing fees as well. And all of the services are free and confidential. And if you've already started working with an attorney and are looking for that second opinion, or or just trying to get more information, go to findyourally.com, enter the community college that you're attending and or your zip code, and you can be connected to a legal service provider in under a minute. For those being a part of the Cal States, you can also find the legal services through findyourally.com/CSU. And for our UC system, we also have findyourally.com/UC. All of these links will be available in my follow-up email to all of you, along with the recording and the list of additional resources. If you are a part of the general community here in California, as we talked about earlier, the state of California is great with supporting our immigrant population. And so there are also free or reduced cost legal services depending on the specifics of your case. And I will send a list of the organizations that are participating in those programs to help the general community at large. So all of these services are ready to support all of you as you navigate the complexities of each and every one of your unique cases. With that, I'll pass it back over to you, and we can start the Q&A and closeout process.
Okay, I think we have one more slide. So as you are a consumer in California and you do have rights, one of those rights is filing a complaint. If you have been in contact with or given money to or had any run-ins with an unscrupulous or a disreputable legal representative, or somebody holding themselves out as a legal representative who is not actually a legal representative. So the first place you can go is your local district attorney, wherever you happen to be, and you can file a complaint there. You can also, if you're working with an attorney and you know where that attorney is licensed, you can report them to the state bar wherever they are licensed. Most state bars have a website. California's is linked there on the slide, but most state bars have some sort of reporting mechanism against the attorneys that are engaging in fraud or unscrupulous behavior. You can also report fraud to the Federal Trade Commission. The FTC has done a lot of work on trying to educate folks about their rights in this space. And so they're always very interested in any reports that people have so that they can look into it further. The California Department of Justice has an Office of Immigrant Assistance. You can also file a complaint against a business or a company. And then if you have an attorney or an accredited representative who's been representing you in removal proceedings, so before an immigration judge, the U.S. Department of Justice Executive Office for Immigration Review, that's the immigration courts, has two places that you can file a complaint. So you can file a fraud complaint if somebody is engaging in fraudulent activity, holding themselves out to be an attorney, but not really an attorney or something along those lines. And then you can also file an immigration attorney or accredited representative complaint against a specific person and give them details of the case so that they can also look into it. Next slide, please.
Liz, did you want me to go through these? Or?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay. So then we just wanted to share some resources that we have related to avoiding fraud in immigration legal services. So we have a shareable flyer on the 10-year green card scam, the first one that we talked about, which is really about cancellation of removal right and requires that you actually are in proceedings, facing deportation, etc. So you can share that to sort of share the word about this. And then we also have some other links there. The one that's called Avoiding Fraud When Seeking Immigration Legal Services. That link actually has both a community resource and then videos in English and Spanish talking about the red flags that Liz talked about. And then let's see, the Immigration Preparedness Toolkit is something that can serve as sort of a helpful starting point for those without status or in mixed status families to help you sort of begin to understand the immigration legal landscape, because in general, right, information is power, and the more you know about what immigration options are out there, the less likely that you're going to fall prey to sort of some of these scams with sort of false promises. And then there's also another link to anti-fraud flyers in English and Spanish. And then the last link, it's a little outdated, but it has a collection of resources about what we talked about today, also using small claims court to potentially try and get relief if you lost money as a result of some fraudulent assistance. And there's also a district attorney's office handbook linked to on that last website about immigration consultant fraud. And it sounds like Alonzo's also going to share these resources with you all afterwards. And I think now we have time for questions if anyone has questions.
Thank you for all of this great information. There have been a couple of questions already, more so specifically around the legal services that are offered at the community colleges. So just to kind of clarify, the services that are available through Find Your Ally are specific to community college students, faculty, staff, dual enrolled, non-credit course, and adult education students. The adult education component is those that are actively enrolled at the community college taking adult courses. So if they are enrolled in Office County of Education that is using the facilities at one of our community colleges, those students are not eligible. So the best way to think about it is if you are enrolled at the community college to take the courses, then you are eligible for the services. But like I mentioned, there is a list of organizations across the state that provide support services to the general community. And that will be available in my follow-up email to all of you. And a quick reminder that this webinar was recorded, and a link to this presentation and all of the resources here discussed will be shared via the email that you used to register for today's conversation. I encourage all of you to ask some questions using the Q&A chat function. So if you have any questions, we have some time to answer those. Go ahead, Ariel.
I was just going to ask Alonzo. So my understanding was that I think at least with like sort of the Dream Resource Centers and the immigration service providers at UCs that family members of students, faculty, and staff can also benefit from the services. Do you know if that's the case? So like if someone's a student and they want to ask about their parents, yeah.
The best course of action for that in terms of family supports is if the student schedules the consultation, then the attorney can kind of figure out the best course of action to support them, whether it falls under the legal services that the community colleges or the Cal States or the UCs offer, or if they need to refer them over to someone else within their department. But the best way to start a conversation is just to schedule one through your ally, and then we can the attorney that's supporting that individual can determine the best course of action to put them with the right attorney that might be more knowledgeable in the specific area that they are seeking services in. So if they're looking for family-based petitions, the attorney that might receive them at the community college for the initial consultation might just do the quick intake and then connect them with that expert or that other attorney that they might be that will support them throughout the duration of their case.
Okay, so it sounds like Find Your Ally is a good starting point. The Immigration Advocates Network directory that we had listed, that Liz talked about, that's in general for sort of free and low cost services. And so if potentially you're talking to a friend or someone who doesn't qualify for the Find Your Ally, that could be a possibly more affordable place to look, since that's primarily nonprofits who either don't charge much or have a lower fee compared to like the American Immigration Lawyers Association, which are private attorneys and, charge a fair amount more. But yeah, does anyone else have questions about the scams that we talked about? Others they've heard, I suppose. These are just some of the common ones that we believe are circulating. Obviously, we can't help people with individual case questions, but yeah.
If you have now, going through this conversation with us today, if you have seen some of those red flags that we pointed out and you want to have that second consultation, there's that list of services that we discussed, or, the Find Your Ally website can help you connect with a reputable attorney that can then provide a second opinion. Or if you've received an opinion from one of our attorneys and are wanting to have a second opinion, there's a different list of organizations as well. We want to make sure that everybody feels supported and they have the right answers, because immigration is not the easiest to navigate, and everybody is unique in their situations. And so we want to make sure that you have that right information to make the decision that are best for you as you have these conversations with a DOJ accredited rep and or a licensed attorney.
Mhm.
And I know, sometimes it's pretty scary to ask some questions in the chat or via our Q&A feature. So again, if you have questions about where to start, where to go, please connect with one of our attorneys after this. And like I said, I will be sharing the recording of this presentation and all of the resources and links that we discussed here today, if and when you're ready to take that next step, or just to clarify anything that might have happened in a previous case. But seeing no additional questions come in, I want to thank both of you for the time that you spent walking us through these immigration scams and what to look out for and how to avoid them. I found the information very helpful, and I hope that our participants did as well. Any closing thoughts before we wrap up today? I did see a hand raise. If you can just drop the question in the chat box, that would be great. We don't have the option to unmute participants through this webinar. But as we await for that, any final thoughts before we wrap up today?
I was just going to add, like when we talked about green flags, things to look for, I would say also just sort of like someone who, you like, that you feel good about to work with, right? I mean, they could be a reputable, totally legitimate attorney, but maybe they're like really rude or mean, and so you don't have to work with them. So just kind of trying to remember that, like we're talking about, like you have rights as consumers, and so, pick someone who you want to work with, who, seems like a good, trustworthy person. Also, when we talked about getting a second opinion, so often consults will have like a small fee, but if you end up working with that person, they'll usually credit whatever you paid for a consult towards your other fees. And so, it could be worth it to, like we're saying, have more than one consult, just to sort of see, as Liz said, maybe someone just notices something that the other person didn't. And so before you necessarily take one person's assessment, it might be good to talk to another person and see if you like them better, or maybe they're cheaper, or whatever it is. So just to keep those things in mind.
And I would say always ask questions. I know it can be really intimidating to be in a room with somebody that knows the system, and and if they're putting pressure on you to just not ask any questions, that's a pretty big red flag. A competent attorney or representative will answer your questions, will understand that this is really complicated. You will have a lot of, you should have a lot of questions. It's not always clear what's happening. So that you don't be afraid to ask questions, especially if you are, especially if you're not sure about the person, that could maybe kind of push you over the edge and say, okay, I don't think I want to work with this person. And again, it might not be that they're incompetent, but if they don't want to communicate with you at the beginning, the chances of them being willing to communicate with you as the case goes on is also really low. So I think from the first or second meeting, you should really be able to tell whether someone is interested in answering and like being open about what's going on with your case. I think that would probably be the only thing that I would leave with.
Yeah, and I just thought 2 questions. So one, someone said, my employer told me I need to pay $14,000 to get a green card. What do you think about that? I feel like we need a lot more information, but I would say in general, if you are getting a green card through employment, then the employer is the person who has to pay the legal fees, not the individual who's getting the green card. And so it sounds a little fishy that the employer is saying that this individual has to pay money to get a green card. So definitely I would investigate that a little further. And then I see there's another question about what sort of the general range of consultation fees are. I'm trying to think, more than 5 years ago, when I actually worked at a small private firm, we charged $100 for our consult, or maybe we charged 200, but that was a couple years ago. So I can't say that that's totally representative. I don't know, Liz, do you have another sense?
I mean, the highest I've ever heard of just for a consultation fee is $250. But usually there's, it's usually like more around like 100. But again, it's also been a few years since I've looked into that. Yeah, but I would say if they're saying it has to be $500,000, $1,000, like that's probably way outside the realm of the lights just turned off on me. Way outside the realm of what would be considered well, can we do
a reasonable amount?
Yeah. And again, if they, that consultation fee, if there's not an offer to apply it to whatever services they're going to provide, that would also, if the consultation fee was really high and they weren't going to offer to put it towards services, that would also be kind of fishy to me.
And sometimes there's no consult fee, and it could be because they are trying to get business. And so they're trying to encourage people to come meet with them. They're maybe starting out a new practice and they're trying to get clients. Or it could be because they're not reputable and they're just saying, come pay me a ton of money to file this thing, but the consult fee is free. So I don't know. It's not necessarily a red flag or a green flag if there's no consult fee, but
right.
Yeah. I would say most do have a consult fee. I also see there's a question about if you're undocumented and you file a complaint, can you be targeted to be deported? And I would say no, there's definitely protections in place to make sure that you are not vulnerable to deportation simply because you are reporting a violation where you've been a victim.
Thank you. And just to kind of throw it out there one more time, the California Community Colleges, the UCs, and the Cal States, all of the consultations do not have a fee. Everything is free of charge. The only thing that the individual is responsible for is that payment to USCIS if it does not fall within the 3 categories that I listed of naturalization application, DACA renewals, and advanced parole filing fees. Everything else that they might be eligible for, they would be responsible for that filing fee, but it will be discussed with them once that resolution or that option is available to them.
And sometimes, I was just going to add along to that, sometimes people qualify for fee waivers of the immigration filing fee, so they might not even have to pay that if they're low income.
So the best course of action is to, again, have a conversation with one of the reputable organizations that are part of the list that we provided, or through the Finder Ally, or one of the 3 systems of higher education and their legal services and the teams that support them. Everything, again, is very unique to the individual, and this informational webinar was meant to do that, just provide the information so you can make the right decision and based on your unique needs and case.
Yeah, I was going to say that's I think a really great sort of last point in terms of every case being unique. So you might hear someone who says, "Oh, I had the exact same situation as you, and so helped me, and it was really easy, and I got my green card, no problem." But there might be differences that you're not aware of, that they're not aware of between each person's case. So you can't just compare yourself to someone else and think that you have the same options and the same result.
Exactly. So we'll leave you with that. Thank you both for your great insight and presentation, and thank you everybody for joining us. And we will follow up with the recording, link to all of the resources that we discussed here today. So thank you all for joining us.